Welcome to the January 30th meeting of the Ames Community School District Board of Directors. I'll call the meeting to order and take approval of the agenda. We will be pulling item 25 from the agenda tonight.
I move that we approve the agenda as presented with the removal of item 25.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Franson. Discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Director Rosser, would you please read the mission statement?
Sure. The mission of the Ames Community Schools is to ensure that all learners develop the knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, and personal esteem necessary to grow in and shape our changing society.
Thank you. Our first item tonight is public forum. We have two wishing to speak. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speakers' participation is limited to 3 minutes once per board meeting. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board don't necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. We ask speakers to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees or students or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. First, we have Deb DeWall.
Hang on, we don't have a microphone.
We'll get you a microphone, Deb. It's coming right now.
Anyway, just wait. It's fine.
Hi, Deb DeWall. Coolidge Drive is where I live, fellows. And I have a cold, so we'll see how this goes. You heard from the community members in December that there are major flaws in communication and feedback processes in this district that have been around for years. This issue needs to be kept at the forefront of your priorities so that work can be done on starting to change this. From what I can figure out, the current communication process for the community to get word to you of issues at the district consists of making a 3-minute statement here at the board meeting, which you might respond to at the end, or we can send you an email, but if there's important topics, then you'll get too many emails and not be able to read all of them. And this is not real communication that can create change on the district issues. There needs to be a real dialogue, and there doesn't appear to be opportunities for that currently. So what's currently in place is not working, and adjustments need to be made. In order to make the district the best it can be for our children, you and district administrators need input from the community. We are additional eyes and ears for you on problems and issues that need to be addressed, a resource for you to use in improving the educational environment. Many large organizations have systems in place to ensure feedback and input that allow for quality improvement. The Ames School District needs to prioritize creating a process for this as well. Some ideas to consider. Maybe you have regular public forums each semester for actual dialogue with the community. Maybe 4 weeks in, there's a discussion on issues of concern that we see, and then midway through, another discussion on how the community feels administration is resolving and improving on those areas. Maybe you supplement this dialogue with anonymous online survey tools. These are free and easily created if you have email addresses, which you all do for parents and staff. Maybe you use that online system to see the top 3 things that need to be addressed in the next 6 months. Maybe you look at the themes and patterns you see addressed over time. It gives you data to use in decision making. You could also use the public forum dialogue and survey strategies for feedback on new programs being planned, decisions being considered, policies being drafted. Doing this in advance of a final decision gives you the input needed to make sure you have the best plan in place for the district. Many organizations also put policies in the working stage on their website with a place for people to give input. If you did this, it would give the community, parents, teachers an opportunity to give you feedback on a policy in progress in advance of you making a final decision. It's time to see you create a district communication policy that includes some specific strategies for seeking community input and feedback on decisions going forward. I realize policies are more restrictive than practices, but written policies is how there's accountability. Policies hold the district accountable for following through on the process, whereas practice just sets the expectation, which can then be ignored. So please put in place a new communication policy identifying the processes the district will be required to use to ensure adequate public input from the Ames community, because what we have in place currently is not adequate. Thank you.
Thank you. Second, we have Karen Stein.
I respectfully request that the Ames District School Board adopt a policy that is inclusive to all students, including those with learning disabilities. This was a statement posted on the district Facebook page today. Overall, I think it's a great statement. The Ames Community School District is among 20 of the most diverse public schools in the state of Iowa, and that diversity is a great source of pride. It is our board policy that children and families will not be discriminated against in our educational programming. I'll stop there. I am struggling with this statement and ask for your input and clarification. Children and families will not be discriminated against in our educational programming. I support having programs piloted. I support searching for what's truly best for our student body as a whole. In our current literacy pilot, 2 out of the 3 programs are not designed, nor are research-based or scientifically proven to assist students with learning disabilities. This is divisive to our student body as a whole. What will you do to make sure our students with learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, are in fact included when we pilot and choose educational core programs? Would you write and implement a district policy to make sure that our students with learning disabilities like dyslexia are included in research-based and scientifically proven educational programs? I respectfully ask each of you, our school board members, to address my question. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll close the public forum.
Should I turn this off?
Well, no, we'll have other people coming up. Thank you, Karen. Our first discussion item tonight is career and technical education course changes at high school.
Good evening. I'm Vonda Junk, and I'm the TOSA for Career and Technical Education, World Languages, and the Mentoring and Induction Program. I'm joined tonight by Dr. Mike Avis, Associate Principal at Ames High School, and 3 of our CTE teachers, Carol Van Woordhuizen, Kent John, and Craig Boylan. We're here to provide you a brief introduction into CTE redesign. It started in 2013 when the Iowa legislature convened a secondary CTE task force, and they worked for about 2 years and came out with a final report in November of 2015 that made 5 recommendations. The 5 recommendations are on the slide. They are career guidance and planning, high-quality secondary CTE programming, work-based learning opportunities, CTE teacher preparation, licensure and professional development, and regional planning partnerships and regional centers. These recommendations were also signed into law in May of 2016 in the form of House File 2392. One of the main goals of this legislation is really to ensure equal access to high-quality CTE programs across the state of Iowa in every school district, and also programs that align to the national career clusters that aid in meeting the needs of employers. Currently, the Department of Education is working on writing proposed rules. This spring, they will be releasing several of these guidance documents that will describe how districts can meet the intent of the legislation and implement these proposed rules. So we have a few pieces from the Department of Education that we're going to share and talk about tonight, but most of it we're waiting for, they hope, by May of this year.
I think you have this slide in front of you. And again, CTE is Career and Technical Education. Stop me if I start using too many initials. 20 years ago when I came to the Ames School District, there was a law, and it's still there, that schools, if they wanted to be accredited public schools, had to offer 3 units, and that's 3 years, whether it's a combination of semester courses and year courses, 3 years in 4 of 6 service areas. And usually each service area had a couple subgroups, career clusters under it that you could have your 3 units in. Well, with this new legislation that Vonda just referred to, they radically changed 4 of the 6. It's not important, I don't think, for you to understand the whole thing, but just to show you how radical it is. The blue used to be home economics up until this year, up until this. Now it's human services, and you don't see anything in the subgroupings that refers to. Now home economics has changed, and it's family consumer sciences, and if we use initials, it's FCS. But that just gives you an example. I could go through the other 3, and I don't think that would be a good use of our time tonight. So what happens, we've got quality CTE teachers, and our departments that are CTE are family consumer science, industrial technology, and business education. So they get in contact with their Department of Ed consultants for the particular area, and they talk about, well, here's the objectives of what I do in the course, here's the experiences the kids have. And through that communication, it was decided that some of our courses needed to change the name to better fit what we actually do and to meet the requirements that the DE is coming up with. So we wanted you to know what some of these name changes are and why they came about, and that's basically our purpose for being here this evening. Start with Carol Van Wartheisen for Family Consumer Sciences, for Human Services now.
Well, we don't know that for sure yet. We don't know if that will be a title change. About 30 years ago, it was changed from home economics to family and consumer sciences. I'm happy to be called a home economist. I don't mind that. I graduated from Iowa State, and so I still embrace that. Human services is all about what we do, though. We work with human families, the individuals, the people, and the people that help achieve better living for our communities through the families that we work with. And so, as you see, education and training is a part of that. Many of the courses that we use are just bringing kids up to understanding what a child should be able to do or could do, etc. So the 3 things that I would like you to do is to change some titles on some courses. We had a course in the past, and we still have the essential standards for learning that was called Contemporary Living. Well, I guess Contemporary Living isn't contemporary anymore, so we'd like to entitle it Introduction to Human Services. That will still be looking at financial literacy, the family, and also the many aspects of families today. And it will look at human needs like food, clothing, shelter, those kinds of things in the introduction to human services. We also have a child development class that's very popular, but we'd like to title it Child Development 1 because it's hard to cover a whole gamut of topics from conception through pregnancy, through birth, through the care of the infant, and then go into toddlerhood, early childhood development, et cetera, all the way up to the school-age child. So we would like to have 2 courses that we previously had, which would be Child Development 1 and Child Development 2. They're not prerequisite, they could be taken in either order, but it's a better spread of the material. The other things that we have are basically just to be proud that we are still, our pulse is on the right target. We don't know what the legislation will say when they bring out the rules, but we hope to be, in good stead for that. I especially want you to know that we offer things like foods, advanced foods, a peer foods class that engages exceptional learners. And then we also have our just typical courses that I've said. All of those can lead into work at the Hunzinger Center for Career Development in the culinary field. And I suspect the community colleges will also start doing a human services component.
In industrial technology, the computer-aided drafting design courses seem to be okay. The DE seemed to find fault with our woodworking courses. So to better reflect what we actually teach, we decided we needed to change the names to more closely match what we actually try to accomplish in our classes. So we changed wood materials to machine safety and operation, because basically that's a course where we teach the kids how to use woodworking equipment. They do some basic project design and construction, but realistically it's a course to teach them how to operate equipment safely. And then in the Woods 1 and Woods 2, we changed those to Project Design and Construction 1 and Project Design and Construction 2. And we try to implement computer-aided drafting, CNC machining, laser engraving. We try to introduce a lot of new technologies so the kids have a wide range of experience that they can take with them when they leave high school.
So basically, we didn't want you to get caught off guard when you're walking down the street and say, what's Introduction to Human Services? Or my son took wood materials and now it's not even on the catalog anymore. Well, it is. It's just under a different name that probably better states what we're doing in the class and also meets the DE's requirements for what we need for CTE. With that said, are there any questions that we can respond to for you?
Overall, what do you see from participation? I mean, do you still see an active group looking to take these classes? Or has that shifted over time?
I was going to
Has that
say,
shifted
she's
over time?
taking us from it because she started out with a max of 24 because of the setup in a room, and then said, yeah, I could put another table in there, and I go to 28. Now she's at 30, and 32, sorry. So that's, if that's an indication.
I teach 7 periods, and I have 320 students a year.
I've got 6 classes of the machine safety and operation this year, 3 each semester, so they're averaging 17 or 18 kids in the class.
So historically, how does this look from 10 or 20 years ago compared to today?
I believe it's rising.
Is it okay?
And we've got more girls now.
Oh, good.
Say that again, a little louder.
Yeah. That's what we're striving to do that. That's one of our things we get dinged on all the time, is we don't have the population of females. And so, we've got quite a few girls in the program this year.
Well, and in one of the industrial tech programs, you can earn DMAC credit, or you do earn DMAC credit, as well as Ames credit for the CAD 2 class, Computer Assisted Drawing and Drafting.
Other questions?
I know this is not scientifically sound, but you mentioned that some of your students leading into some of the coursework at DMAC at the Hunziker Center. For both of you, are you seeing a larger portion doing that, or larger, they're filling the credit as a part, a means to fill that gap for graduation? Do you see, there's been such a focus on some of the technical education and discussions within the community of how we're not only preparing kids for the workforce, but also for higher education. Can you speak to that at all with your in lieu of your classes?
I think that we are seeing more, but I'm also seeing that kids take a roundabout sometimes to get to those, such as a person that would go into education, for example, and then they might focus in on early childhood education, or they might focus in on, you know, a different aspect. I'm really excited because law, public safety, corrections, and security is under human services. And I think we see a need for that to be emerging. And we also have hospitality and tourism. All those things, some of the community colleges are they're building hotels and they're running courses in that aspect. So I think there's going to be more two-year degree programs, and I think we'll be feeding into more and more of those. We can feed into early childhood right now. We can feed into the fashion classes yet. We can also feed into the culinary things, but we hadn't thought about, I guess, about public safety. You know, that hadn't been on our radar, and that, you know, we have a teacher academy, and so those things are emerging.
I think I see a lot of kids that are heading for engineering, more so that way than to the technical school. So I've got a lot of kids that end up taking class at Iowa State in their engineering program after they've taken like CAD 1. The things that we learn in CAD 1, they're actually doing in their beginning and engineering classes, so they've got a leg up when they start because they've had experience with the pieces of software that they experience when they get to college. So.
Great. Anything else?
Yeah. One other question. I know your business representative isn't necessarily here, but typically I've had a number of parents and students, for that matter, talk about accessing a programming course. And I was wondering if that would fall into this area, and what thoughts for the future you have for offering that course.
We're not sure where it's going to fall, but it will be in, our students start signing up for classes in 2 days on Wednesday, and there will be a computer programming class listed there, one that came to you last year.
Okay, so that's going to start this fall?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Or at least we're seeing what interest there is in it.
Right, right.
Great. Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Our next item this evening is the Iowa School Report Card.
I think maybe while Dan and Mandy are coming up here, just for the board's appreciation, I think, in the back corner is Dr. Anthony Jones, who's picked up as the interim principal at Fellows School. Anthony, do you want to stand up for a second and let the board see who you are? As you run across from Anthony, Spence Evans, of course, the high school principal. Next to him is Pam Stanglin, the middle school principal. Steve Flynn from Meeker. Dave Peterson from Edwards. And then if we come back right in front of Dave is Justin Jeffs from Mitchell, Sue Lawler from Sawyer, and Brandon Schroff, who's the principal at Northwood Preschool Center. So they're all here to help answer some questions later on, and thank you guys for being here tonight, for all your work.
Good evening. Dan and I are here this evening to provide you with an overview of the Iowa School Report Card and give you a little bit of background in the Ames part of that story. Additionally, as Dr. Taylor just pointed out, we've invited our building principals to join us in the event that there are some building level questions at the end of our prepared remarks. So the Iowa School Report Card is developed by the Iowa Department of Education. It's not a local initiative in any way, shape, or form, and it was developed in response to 2013 legislative requirement found in House File 215. You may recall that last year was the initial year for this report, and currently for the 2016 school year, so it's always a year behind, there are 10 data points that are included in the report. It's important to note that out of those 10 data points, 7 of them are based on Iowa assessment data. In Ames, our students in grades 3 through 11, including 9 and 10, 9 I believe is not required by state law, but we include them in our testing, and those students take the Iowa assessment every year. And the results from those assessments are woven into the Iowa School Report Card. The report card is specific to each public school in the state of Iowa, so each school has its own unique score, but there is no score for a school district.
As Dr. Ross just shared, that a significant portion of the Iowa School Report Card is based on our Iowa assessment scores. The DE was very purposeful when they designed this, and that they weighted different categories differently. So when we look at this, the way it lays out this year is that actually a little more than 70% is factored in from Iowa assessments because of the fact that 2 of the categories aren't in our scoring yet. So they distribute those into those other categories. As we get all the categories in 3 years, at the high school level, it'll be 70%. At the lower grades, it'll be slightly more than that because some of the categories graduation rate doesn't apply to middle school and elementary. In the report, you'll see that we have Ames High School, Ames Middle School, and our 5 elementaries, but Northwood is not there. And that's because Northwood doesn't take Iowa assessments. There are some other reports that pull data from Northwood in terms of their gold and their fast scores, but they don't show up in this report yet. There have been questions to the DE about some of that, but I don't see that coming in right now. There are also 6 levels of performance: exceptional, high performing, commendable, acceptable, needs improvement, and priority. And that is the order in which they go. So exceptional is at the top, priority is towards the bottom. As you look at our particular data, you'll notice that 5 of our 7 schools showed a positive change in their rating from last year, so the far right column. Meeker actually improved 2 categories. All of the buildings are in the commendable or above category, putting them above state averages. 6 out of the 7 buildings showed an overall score increase from year to year. The middle school did lose some ground this year, in part because several of the markers weren't used last year, and when they factored the change from, they calculated them, but they didn't include them in the score. And then they calculated that based on the change. So they saw a negative change in some of those scores, being mostly the close the gap scores, which are actually the only calculated scores on here. They run those through a t-test to pull out a statistic that they can lay on top of the other ones. The other ones are what percentage of your students are proficient, and that factors over. So that score is very complicated to try and understand. So that's where our schools are. The other interesting thing from my seat on the bus, most of you probably won't find this very fascinating. In 2015, when they started this, they set all the schools in what we call a normal distribution. Most people here call the bell curve. And they laid out all the schools and their scores, and they used that bell curve to set the lines where they would be in the future. So the top 3% last year were exceptional. That's where we drew the line last year. When we roll that forward this year, you'll notice that only 1% of high schools in the state of Iowa are now exceptional. That as they've added things, and they need some trend line to make that adjustment. But you can see as the distribution in those graphs that we're seeing a little bit of shift backwards. Accountability or acceptable went up, commendable went down, high performing went down. We see some changes like that. The other really messy thing on this DE report is the scales change. So if you look at 38% on 2015, it actually looks higher than 45% the next year, and that's based on the scale. So it's visually, this is a very difficult thing to read. Yes, this is screenshots right off the report card itself.
Do we know why they're trying to get to a bell curve? I mean, is there a reason they're trying to?
I think it's just how they establish their cut scores in the first year, and so they're not trying to get to a bell curve. I think they were just using that to establish the initial cut scores, and so that was their starting point to try to figure out where they go next.
That's the best answer I've got. So
So the question might be, how as a school district do we use this information? And obviously it's a conversation with the board, with our constituents. Even though if you look at the DE's website for the Iowa School Report Card, it talks about not comparing yourself to other schools, and yet we do. Let's just be honest with ourselves. We look at ourselves against other districts, other schools in those districts to see how we measure up. But most importantly, I think, is how we look at ourselves. And our principals have had some preliminary time to start looking at the Iowa School Report Card to get to understand their data. And most importantly, from my seat on the bus, is how they look at each other, to learn from each other and grow from each other. But I think that when you really look at how those data are presented, the DE, in order to get their scores, they cluster or group the data from reading and math together, and then they cluster grade levels together. So when we look at our Iowa assessment data in particular at the district level, we look at those data separate of one another. We look at them by grade, we look at them by student, we look at them by cohort groups. So the data in and of itself in these numbers really don't drive a lot of our conversations other than a starting point, because our data analysis on the Iowa assessment is much more detailed than the way it's clumped together in the Iowa School Report Card. And then in terms of the report card itself, we're starting to look at trends. We've already taken the data for each of the categories that there are 2 years of data for and started looking at what's going on building by building, what's going on across the district. And one of the documents that I've shared with our principals really shows that overall, our buildings have grown in most every category. And in some cases, our buildings have taken some great leaps in some of those categories. I kind of touched on the points in this slide, in particular drilling into the data, but at a district level, one of the things we do look at is, can some of the Iowa School Report Card data inform some of our professional development needs, some of our program needs, and yet they're not really sensitive enough the way they're grouped, other than, for example, attendance, staff retention. Those data sets are a little more confined, and so they do give us some information about our program and professional development. There's also a piece specific to student attendance. And we actually have now initiated at the district level an attendance committee, and our teaching and learning committee board members are part of that, at least for most of our meetings so far. And really what we're trying to do is look at our board policy, making sure that it's accurate, that it's well implemented. And so we have principals on that group, principal representatives, not all of our principals. We're looking at attendance data and our practices together. And we've also done an initial meeting with Jessica Reynolds, who is the new Story County attorney, and really looking at how we can include their support from the Story County Attorney's Office, not necessarily from a punitive standpoint, but really just to make sure that we've got that level of support for our families and our students when attendance becomes an issue. We also, on that committee, have Senator Cornbach, and one of the notes in that first meeting was that data reported to the Iowa Department of Education on student attendance is not reported consistently. For example, Some schools could report students as being absent for school events, and others might not. So that needs to be tightened up, and with Senator Cornbach's assistance, we're hoping to get that tightened up, although I think there's conversations starting at the Department of Education. So that attendance committee will help, we believe, grow that particular attendance data set across the board for all of our students. One of the other conversations that I think might be germane to the student attendance piece too is the fact that in our last attendance committee meeting, there was conversation around IPI, or independent private instruction. And a couple of years ago, you may recall that the legislature determined that there could be another element to the homeschooled possibilities, because in the past, homeschool families were required to register with their homeschool district and then with the Heartland, or in our case, Heartland Area Education Agency, so that we knew that students were out there and they were making growth and progress. And with IPI, the legislature determined that families can choose not to have children registered for homeschool and just independently school their children at home without any notification to any governmental reporting agency. In recent weeks, the Des Moines Register has pointed out that there are some cases where that particular initiative is being abused, and so that conversation seems to be starting up again at the legislative level. Another category in the Iowa School Report Card is staff retention. In our district, the master contract does a lot to influence our ability to for teachers to transfer from one classroom or grade to another, or from one building to another. And obviously, that makes it difficult to manage that staff retention piece because, you know, the management of the district has no control over that. So student enrollment, for example, impacts involuntary transfers. So if there's a bubble class, and I know the board is well aware that we've had situations in recent years where even in the second week of school we're working to hire because there's suddenly a bubble of enrollment in a particular grade level in one of our schools. Staff retention is also influenced by unique situations, and one of the ones in recent memory is when Sawyer went to Camp Sawyer, and we went from virtually a 3-section building at Old Sawyer, moved them over to Edwards to Camp Sawyer, Old Edwards to Camp Sawyer, and went down to a 2-section building because that's what the building would accommodate. And so consequently, the staff retention rating for Sawyer at that point in time became problematic, but not really reflective of what was going on, because we know that staff did choose to return to the building when Sawyer opened up in its remodeled condition.
This one's using our data to kind of look at a big picture view of things. And the data allows us to, at a certain level, compare ourselves to others. Now, when the DE lined this up, they've been very clear. 1, you're not supposed to compare to everything else. And 2, we want to treat these categories kind of like we do letter grades. If you get an A at 91% or you get an A at 98%, that's an A. And you're all in that same grouping together. So it is clearly not intended to rank schools, this is number 1, this is number 2, like many of the other things you see out there in terms of rating schools. There are obviously some limitations, and I see a lot more of them than most people probably because I'm looking at the fine details. But a couple of the big ones is that last year when I went through school by school and analyzed it in terms of the high schools, smaller schools fared better than large schools. All the Class 4A schools were noticeably lower in their scores than any of those other schools. And groups with smaller subgroups, smaller than the N of 10, those scores drop out, so they only have 3 or 4 categories that affect their score. So they have much more fluctuation in their scores than we do, because what for us is 20% of our score might be 40% for those schools. And so things like staff retention, if you're in a small school where staff doesn't move buildings across the lines and things of that nature, and they are weighted more, they're naturally going to score better at the end. So it's a very complicated report. There are lots of moving parts, but that's sort of at a really high level some of the concerns that I would say we see or limitations in this.
So the last slide shows the links to the Iowa Department of Education's press release, as well as the link to the Iowa School Report Card itself. And if you dig into the Iowa School Report Card, you're going to see very quickly that we are giving you just the scratch of the surface this evening. But I think an introduction to it is in order, because as you start drilling in, you see that it, as Dan pointed out, it is very complex data, and it tells a lot, but not the entirety of our story. So at this time, we'd be happy to entertain questions you may have for us or for our principal friends behind us. So.
One of the board goals this year was to define success within the Ames Community School District. And while the Department of Education has pushed this to all school districts and elected these measurements to look at, my first question is, one, are there these educational measurements that we should include in our evaluation? And then two, I know it's just a point of clarity, but understanding that we're not trying to measure against each other, I think, is important. And reading other periodicals and newspaper articles out there, that it comes to me that we shouldn't look at this specifically for how we're doing overall. I just want to highlight that. But how do we, I guess, use this information or parts of this information to help us get better moving forward?
As a matter of fact, a couple of meetings ago, the principals and administrators brainstormed some ideas of how we might define success, and that was shared with the Teaching and Learning Committee last week. And there was some overlap between the categories on the Iowa School Report Card and the list that the principals came up with. I think, putting on my old dusty principal hat, that sometimes it's hard to, rise to that board level of how you might define success, because the list that I shared with TLC really, there was a lot of what I would call building level data, but yet how do we translate that into the definition of success? And I know that Director Franzen mentioned that it might be something that we want to talk a little bit more at the board level about, just to start getting a little narrower focus on the meaning of success. Because if we're talking about graduation, post-graduation, do we want to look at 3 years out? How are our graduates doing, as opposed to, do we want to look grade by grade by grade over time? How small or large do we want to look at that? And is it during the course of the progress of a student while they're in school with us, or do we want to look at them as a product, if you will? I hate to call kids products, but just that model of looking at our kids after they graduate and what their success is looking like there. So I think a conversation to narrow that down a little bit, and then I think we're getting ready to take another stab at that.
So of the 12 or 10 that are there, what would you consider are the top 3 or top 5? I mean, how would you rank them? I don't know if we have that agenda item to show, but it lists all of them, from proficiency being 20% of the overall score. I just didn't know from your experience, what do you most value that the D is looking at?
I think the proficiency is extremely important, but we know that there are a lot of variables that impact that proficiency. And even looking at our attendance conversations, if kids aren't at school, we can't impact their learning. And so that's why we've started to put some time and energy into really drilling into the attendance question, because that's a place where we can start getting that proficiency score, we believe, to jump up if we get those kids who, might not be attending on a regular basis. But then starting that attendance challenge, that attendance push, if you will, as early as preschool, because that's where we start really developing those habits, not only with the children, but with the families, and making sure that school's important.
If I could just add one more thing. 70% of these scores are based on Iowa assessments, and I'm concerned that that's the only proficiency measure in here. I would like to say if we're going to gauge proficiency, we're going to use something a little more broad that reflects what our teachers are teaching in the classroom and targets those things a little bit better. So proficiency needs to be in your conversation. Is this the right tool to measure that is the real question.
And I would propose the answer would be no. It's too broad for us to say, yeah, we can rest on that one, and we won't rest regardless, but it's just not fine-tuned enough. I think we would both agree.
So what are the consequences if a building was in the priority category for 3 years? What would the legislature do? What are the consequences for being in that lowest category?
Yeah. At this point in time, there's nothing. However, the thing that will go into play, assuming nothing changes, is every Student Succeeds Act is looking at identification of the lowest 5% of schools in the state of Iowa, much like No Child Left Behind had in play. And so there would be something that would take in effect with ESSA, but not necessarily with the Iowa School Report Card. I'm not so sure, and because we haven't seen the data, there's nothing in place yet where we really see what the overlap would be between Iowa School Report Card and the ESSA ratings that they're proposing, but I'm guessing that there's going to be a correlation there somewhere.
So I would kind of conclude from this presentation then that the Iowa School Report Card doesn't do much to drive our behavior. It's simply a reflection of what is, whether it's through assessments, staff retention, and attendance. And so it doesn't tell us much. We're just punching a ticket and giving the media something either good or bad to respond to. And so my gut tells me the less time we spend on this, probably the better, because there's more fruitful ways for us to impact the future than this. Is that fair?
I think it's extremely fair and accurate.
Any questions?
Yeah.
But I do
Mike,
have one more
actually, I do
question.
have a question for you guys. You know, one of the things when this data first came out, and I agree, you know, it's just the one assessment. It'd be great if it included more assessments and maybe a better assessment, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But it is what it is, and it's the data that we've had for 3 years. So, you know, when I first looked at it, I was, you know, very proud of the leaders in our buildings, the teachers in our classrooms, and hey, the students, because they're achieving. But there is concern, and you know, it's not just my concern; it's concerns that I've heard from people in the community regarding the middle school and the closing the achievement gap issues with our African American students. Pretty dramatically, you know, 30-point difference in their proficiency from the average typical student at the school, and not only that, but it's actually in the past 3 years it's going in the wrong direction. You know, this year it's 53, last year was 59, the year before that it was 61%. So we're going the wrong way. So I've heard and I think the first step, you know, with the attendance is the right thing, but what else are we doing to address that achievement gap? It's kind of what I'd like to hear.
And really, it's a lengthy list, and
I'm so glad you asked that. I've been waiting.
Good.
This is something, again, this is not new data for us. This is something that is not new to our teachers, new to our administration. This is something that we've been looking at longitudinally for multiple years. As a matter of fact, that has been one of the areas of focus in our building goals. January 16th, the big ice storm of the century, our professional development was geared toward just this factor. Looking at our data as it pertains to students of color, to students from different backgrounds, and saying, what are we doing? Why are these factors happening, and why are they happening continually? So our professional development this year, last year, has been working toward that. We had some work to do. We have students with lower SES that are not to that same level as well. So we're looking at this systemically, and we're making plans, professional development, and continued growth in that area. So Although I'm not happy with going backwards. Everyone likes to be on top. I think we will be back on top here soon. But I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to shine the light on really the work that we're doing and the work that we know we can impact. I would much rather be in a community that has a diverse population and has this opportunity to make changes than some type of community that doesn't even have diversity and just the end isn't even counting. So it's a good thing for us.
The other thing I would add to Pam's remarks are that we are actually starting a conversation later this week to be looking at, as part of our professional development, likely starting next year, some of the things that are already happening at Sawyer, and the middle school was just getting ready to start, and that is really looking at cultural competence. Do our staff really understand how to meet the needs of a diverse group of students? Because, you know, if you've been in this community for very long, you know that this community has changed over the years. And so how do we make sure that we're responsive in our instruction relative to the diverse needs of our students? Because not all of them were raised the same way we were, and we need to respond to every single one of those kids.
Pam, is there any consistent themes you're hearing from parents of this kind of group? I mean, is it something that we can help support in certain ways from the board, or?
I don't know that there's a consistent theme. There are consistent needs. And each subgroup has those needs. And I think that in our effort to treat all children equally, that has kind of been a detriment because, again, all children are not equal. They don't come to us with equal backgrounds. They don't come to us with equal benefits and equal resources. So we have done a lot at the middle school of, you know, providing meals for kids, providing backpacks for kids, providing some of those basic needs to make sure their basic needs are met when they walk into the middle school. We need to do more with the education and really informing why it's important, attendance, all of those things that fit into the whole child and help them be successful. And with our staff, you know, really making sure that we're focusing on not the same, but we need to make sure that everyone has that opportunity.
I just want to add, and I want to go back to Director Asmuset's comments earlier. We have to be very careful how we look at the report card. We're taking, 70% of that is from the Iowa assessment, which is 4 days of testing. And if you know anything, the flu went through the high school like no other. During our testing, we were right just under 10% of our population. You have to let the health department know when you're at 10%. Throughout our whole testing period, we just started our retakes. We almost had more retakes to do than kids were finished. So I am scared about the fact of what the data is going to look like next year after going through a flu season of 4. So I would rather have a goal setting set on attendance throughout the year, achievement throughout the year, graduation rate, dropout rate when dealing with 4 years within our system, or even more than 4 years. Those are the types of goals that I want to know that I can bring my, pail to work every day, and we're working to improve on those goals and can reflect the entire school year and then more school years than just 4 days out of a 180-day school.
Well, that just gets into a question that, just because I'm not, there's parts of this that I'm not thrilled with, but if we have a lot of students out during Iowa assessments, and we know that we know the statistics of how much more poorly kids test when they take a retest instead of taking it on the day that it was originally assigned, they don't put that into the data analysis, do they? Do they bump those scores back up? So if, on a year like this, if we have 10% out, we automatically know next year's scores are going to be probably off, because they're giving us a statistical breakdown of something that we have a stat that would tell us that the stats aren't valid, but then they're still going to use the stats, right? Thank you. Good. Which would go back to my other point, and this is something that Elisa and I have talked about a little bit. You look at the 10 criteria here, and we keep talking about this success thing, and I know we both attended at the Iowa School Board convention, one meeting that talked about goals. Talked about simply if districts or schools have, I think the data was if they had 2 goals, they completed 2 of their goals. If they had 2 to 3 goals, they completed 2 to 3 of their goals. If they had 5 goals, they completed 2 of their goals. If they had more than 5 goals, which is exactly what this list is, they completed 1 or 0 of their goals. We've got a list of 10 goals here. You're not going to focus on all 10 of those things and be able to succeed. So then the question is, how do we simplify that? Which goes back to defining that success and
Right. And I can tell you that the group, and I'm a part of that group, and so is Pam, and then Sue as well as an attendance group. The biggest concern that we have right now is that our kids are in the seats at our school because we believe our teachers can do the job of teaching them if they're there. And so a big push for attendance right now to make sure that's happening. We have to get better. We have to get our kids to school. That has to become a community issue, not just a school issue. And it's kind of like how character counts flew through school, our communities. The push for attendance and to be at school has to be the number one thing that I think drives us. Because whether a child is sick, skipping school, suspended, they're all the same thing. They're not there at school learning, and that's what we want.
Any other questions, discussion? It's been a good discussion. Thank you. Moving on to Smarter Balance.
So continuation kind of the conversation we just had, because for the past 4 or 5 years, Ames and many other schools across the state of Iowa have been preparing for the implementation of Smarter Balanced, beginning with the 2017-18 school year. We did some calculations.
Can you explain to everybody what Smarter Balance is real quick?
Smarter Balanced is what is being proposed to replace Iowa assessments. And for the last 3 or 4 years, our staff has spent well over 1,000 staff hours of time trying to get prepared, because that was the direction that the legislature, the State Board of Education, and the Iowa Department of Education were telling us we were going. So Dan and Carl in particular really sat down and put pencil to paper to, well, they may have done it electronically, knowing those two, but that being said, they really tried to estimate how many hours we've spent of our staff's time and student time, because the Iowa Department of Education requested that some of our students test or pilot the Smarter Balanced assessment, because it's an online assessment, which is considerably different than the Iowa assessments, which are paper pencil. So there's been hours and hours and hours and hours, including webinars, meetings both in the district with our staff and out of the district with our staff being educated about Smarter Balanced with the Department of Education, with Heartland AEA, as well as with other districts. So within the first week of this year's legislative session, we learned that the brakes were being put on implementation of Smarter Balanced statewide. So we're here tonight to inform you about this and seek the support of the board and our community in helping our legislators understand the importance of moving forward with Smarter Balanced implementation. So we just thought it might be important to touch on some reasons that we believe that going to Smarter Balanced is smarter. First, we believe that Smarter Balanced will give us more and better data on our students. As you may be aware, Smarter Balanced is a computer adaptive test, which means that the more answers a student gets correct, the more rigorous the test becomes. Therefore, teachers really have a better understanding of what students know and can do, and can adapt instruction accordingly. Right now, Dr. Taylor has described Iowa assessments as an autopsy of what happened during the previous school year. The formative data from Smarter Balanced, we believe, is going to give us better information about our students. Smarter Balanced assessment suite includes not just the end of the year tests like Iowa assessments, but it's also an informative formative assessments as part of that suite of assessment tools. This allows our teachers to have actionable feedback to adapt instruction in the classroom, and it also allows our students to adjust for the computer adaptive testing environment because they've got some practice doing those formative assessments online throughout the school year. Although districts have not seen yet the entire Smarter Balanced suite, we're confident that we could potentially replace some of our current formative assessments with Smarter Balanced formative assessments. Cost has been discussed as a concern. At this time, we were being told that the Smarter Balanced suite would run about $30 per student each year, maybe just a little bit less. I think that's kind of on the high end of the estimate. However, we believe that if Smarter Balanced replaced some of our other assessments, that would help offset the costs associated with Iowa assessments, some of our formative assessments, and the variety of reports. Right now, we pay roughly $7 per student for Iowa assessments because there's some additional support at the state level because Iowa assessments come out of Iowa City. But we also get quite a bit of additional cost beyond the per student testing cost just in the various reports because each different report runs a few dollars here, a few dollars there, times X number of students. All in all, better data would make the cost increase worthwhile is what our belief is. So currently we're on pace as a district to implement Smarter Balance next year. And as the current version of Iowa Assessments prepares to sunset, we believe our students would be best served by the transition to Smarter Balanced, and we would encourage our legislators and our board and community to recognize this and help value and support moving back to Smarter Balanced, getting us back on track so that we don't have to scramble at the 11th hour if, in fact, the legislature comes back around to it at the end of the legislative session. And that would be a small disaster as we try to get ourselves ready to start next year. So we'd entertain questions as much as we know.
Do you have you said that we were testing Smarter Balance with some of our students. Do you know which other districts were asked to do that?
It was a statewide call. We did it 4 years ago, I think. We were in the pilot phase, so we were a smaller group of schools that tested. We tested third graders, fourth graders, and fifth graders at a few of our elementary schools. Just to help the state get their feet under them, make sure the technology was working that. The following year, I believe we were what was called the pilot. The next year they did a field test, which was a much larger sample of students with other schools from around the country and that. So our students got a hand to touch it early on, and there was a small number, but it wasn't exactly we would like Ames to do this specifically. It was a call out, and we responded, but we were one of the largest schools participating at that time just to try and get the infrastructure working.
So it's really just thinking the lobbying effort, if we knew what other districts we could contact to band together.
If I were going to take a guess, I'd guess that Carl's probably looking right now. So
if we can get that, I mean, I'd gladly work behind the scenes to get with those other districts and see if there's anything that,
we can work on
one of us making that contact isn't as helpful as 10 of us going together and making
Absolutely.
that contact.
So what are we hearing from the legislature in terms of their reasoning to put the brakes on this?
To put the brakes on it, I think in part it has to do with that it measures what they will refer, what we call the Iowa Core, what they call the Common Core, and the brakes on it come from that point in STEM. So the fact that it measures what we're teaching is one of the reservations that they have about it. And then the cost is the other one that we hear a lot about.
You're joking about the first one, right?
Not really, no, there's
I think really what it gets down to is that there are some members of the legislature who want to do away with the Common Core.
Yeah.
So I think you weave those two pieces together, and then that's where you get the answer that the aligned testing is something they're not interested in pursuing further.
So Louis and I were down in Des Moines on Tuesday talking to our legislators, and a couple of, I was digging through my notes. This was one of the 5 things that our IASB lobbyists encouraged us to talk to legislators about was this assessment piece. my understanding of the task force, when they made this recommendation, it was 20 of 21 voted in favor of it. There's a House file to completely scrap all of the work that this group has done and to not allow any of those task force members to serve on the new task force to address this. So I don't know how far that has gotten, but that was a mention in one of our meetings last week. So we did make sure to bring it up with all of our legislators. I think it's important to continue to remind them, and maybe if you two could help us and send us those points, because I was frantically making my notes because you brought up new points that I have not brought to their attention. But we did also have that reinforced, because I said, why on earth, I can't figure out why we would not want this. And I got a similar answer that, that there's a belief among some to completely abolish the Iowa Corps, and this is one way to go about it.
I'd be happy to share this.
Right. And then just to add a little bit, when we were down there on Tuesday, and it was the IASB meeting with the legislators, and Tim, to answer you, there were a number of us from districts throughout the state that talked to legislators about this specific issue, in addition to at least 4 other issues. So they've heard about it, and yeah, it is frustrating because, you know, we've spent years on this. Other school districts have also too, and unfortunately, yes, some school districts are claiming that the costs related to not only cost, but also possibly the lack of computers in their district, so that students can each take it, you know, in the days that it's required. They don't have computers for all students to do that in some of the rural, smaller districts. But what's really driving it, and what really is disheartening to me, is the philosophical reason of fighting the Common Core, and not necessarily the Iowa Core. And let's make sure that, you know, that there's a difference there. Just that philosophical, you know, fight, and that's what is really driving this. So that's the most, you know, honest answer we can give to this. And I'll challenge our audience and those at home that that's who we need to talk to, not only our local legislators, who for the most part support, or definitely support, moving forward with this new assessment, but we need to reach out to your mom and dad or cousin or whoever that lives outside of our district, and have them speak to their representatives, and let them know that this is something that we need to move forward with. It's a better assessment. It's going to give us much better data, and we shouldn't really be wasting the good work and time and effort and costs that have been related to what's been done over the past 4 years. Because if they do completely throw it out, they're going to come up with one of the other, Mike, one of the other concerns about it was that this is not necessarily a Iowa-based company, and maybe we get something less expensive locally. Well, you know, that if we start the whole process over again, it could be another 3 or 4 years before we finally get an assessment, and we're going to spend that money again that we just spent over the last 4 years, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars statewide. Would that be correct?
Oh, I think it easily. Okay. Just because if we were going to put it, if we broke it down to how, you know, number of man hours that we've already used here in Ames, take it times the cost of the employees involved, and how do you put a number to the kids who tested during the pilot? You know, I don't know how you put a dollar value to that, but long story short, we've already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm trying really hard not to sound like I'm exaggerating, but really if you took 1,100 hours, and that was a very conservative number, and take it times the people who have been involved in preparing, it's a lot of money. A lot of money, a lot of man hours, a lot of time invested. Yeah.
Dr. Taylor, what's the likelihood this will happen?
I'd say right now about 0. I think it's about 0% chance that Smarter Balance is going to be accepted by the state. That's just my opinion on it. I hate to really say that, but there's this there's this thing about the Common Core that is such a misconception out there to actually begin with. The Common Core is our curriculum by the state, and we're unpacking it to identify standards that our teachers are then passing on to the kids. But the thing that I liked about a smarter balance, very easily, and Dr. Ross said it a second ago, when we give the Iowa assessments, we give them now, we're going to get the results in May. What do you do with it now? It is an autopsy. The kids have already moved on to the next grade level. There isn't anything you can do to go back and try and help out. Smarter balance is entirely different. I like to compare that to when you're working with your child, or when you were a kid, on your birthday, you backed up against the wall and made a little mark on the wall. Next year, you come back and do the same thing. It's really that way, but as you're taking that exam and moving along, like Dr. Ross said, if you're getting the questions right, it becomes more and more strenuous as you move along, so that you can really find out potential of kids and where they're at. So that, as dramatic as that sounded for me to say 0, I really do believe it's not going to make it through, but we have hope.
Well, just to add to that, should remind folks that one of the important things about this test is that it's aligned with our current Iowa core. And that's, unfortunately, the test we're using right now is not. And that's frustrating, I'm sure, for teachers in the classroom. And it makes it even more difficult for us to then utilize that data, to address, how we're going to do things differently in the classroom. So it is really important for us to get, that new assessment that's aligned with the core, because currently that's not the case.
And currently, we are in the process of creating a letter and providing some data to our legislators that represent our district to share some of those concerns. And we hope to get that out in the next day or two, complete with a link to the data. So we'll try to get that out and keep the board informed on how that conversation goes.
One suggestion to add that I heard from not only our House Education Chair, but one or two of our legislators, is that we're assessing too much. So, and what I heard you say is this streamlines some of the assessing and removes or replaces some of the others. So maybe those might be some really good points to make in that information to them.
And I think that there's some caution in using a very generic remark about over-assessing, because we had the administrators and the instructional coaches in this very room doing some professional development late last week. And one of the things that we talked about was that when you talk about assessment, it's a continuum. Something as informal as observing your audience. And in gradual release, it's labeled more succinctly as noticing. So that's a formative assessment. As I'm watching all the board members going, okay, am I saying the right things? Am I using too many acronyms? I'm assessing. If that's over-assessing, then I'm not a very good teacher. If we're talking about the state assessments, we've got one. We've got one in a year. If we're talking about formative assessments that help me inform what I do with every single one of my students in my classroom, I don't know that you can over-assess if you're using the data formatively and using it well. And I think part of it is that ongoing professional development that we are providing about using formative assessment data to drive instruction through the professional learning communities in each of our buildings. Without that vehicle, then maybe we are over-assessing. But over-assessing, I think, is overused.
Absolutely agree. I just was checking my notes, and that's what he said, so.
And you know the argument wasn't with you. I just think that that's an umbrella statement, so
Agreed
I know that you know, so.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
All right, well, thank you for the update. Moving on, our 2017-18, 18-19 district calendars.
I'm going to ask for Dr. Ross to give me a little help with the overhead there. A little bit more mundane of a topic here. We're trying to get our calendars approved for the next 2 years. And I think it's important for people to understand, I think while Dr. Ross puts this up there, that there really are about 5 major considerations that we've got to look at, and then we're lucky to have those at the current time. But by board action, we do have 180 days of student instruction that must meet a state requirement of 1,080 hours. Our board, quite intentionally and intelligently a few years ago, adopted the idea that regardless of the fact that we were only requiring 1,080 hours by the state, we did have the high school that was reaching about 1,145 hours, which is a whole bunch. Our middle school and our elementaries were a little bit less than that, but we have now adopted 1,140 hours as opposed to the state standard of 1,080 hours. And that comes back to attendance and getting kids in school, and the more instruction you can provide them, certainly the better off they're going to be. So it's providing 180 days of student instruction, 188 teacher work days, of which 5 must be professional development, providing teachers with 10 recess days by master contract, and those days have to be spread between spring break and winter break and may not include federal holidays. We coordinate every year with the ISU calendar, especially when it comes to spring break, and by new legislation of a couple of years ago, we can't start classes before August 23rd of any year. So it took away our start date, and by law and by board action of 180 days of student instruction, it very clearly identifies what our ending date is. And you can see on the calendar that Dr. Ross has up there right now for next year, which would be 2017, 2018. We're looking at starting again on the 23rd of August, which is a Wednesday. Pam and Spence just left, but there was something that came up a couple years ago. We were looking at calendars and trying to figure out the idea about starting on Mondays and Tuesdays, and clearly the feedback that came back from staff relative to calendars is if you start on a Monday, it's pretty hard on those kids after they come back after the summer to all of a sudden climb into a classroom and be there 5 days in a row. So they kind of, as a staff and as a administrative team, they said whenever possible, Wednesday or Thursday is the best day of the week to start school. So we're very lucky we're in that cycle right now where the 23rd for 17-18 will fall on a Wednesday, which really is a preferred date. And kindergarten will then start on the 25th. The rest of the calendar seems to fall right into place. I want to point out something that, again, our building principals, I think with some feedback from some of our staff, pointed out about October. And that is that there is a Halloween holiday, not really a federal holiday, but there is Halloween every October, and it's on the 31st, and it's trick or treat. And we have a lot of younger staff members who have kids that want that enjoyment of being able to take their students to trick or treat. So the calendar itself doesn't really change. The only thing that changes is the way that we have to communicate with our parents. For instance, we will have parent-teacher conferences on the evening of October 30th. We will not have parent-teacher conferences after school or an evening on the 31st, so that everyone may enjoy their kids out trick-or-treating. We will have parent-teacher conferences on the evening of November 1, and then we will have parent-teacher conferences in the buildings all day on the 2nd, but there will be no classes on the 2nd or the 3rd. So that's kind of the change from our technique that we've had in the past. That same thing applies for the very next year, as we'll get to that in just a second. Those really are the only things that come into play. Again, this allows us to be done for 17-18 after 180 days of class on Wednesday, May 30th, with 2 teacher work days after that, which stretch a little bit into June 1 for our new teachers coming back. If Dr. Ross flips that over, you can see that it's very traditional. It's almost identical. We will again start in the 23rd, which happens to be a Thursday. I think everybody's probably figured out that we're going to have a problem when we get to 2019-2020 because the 23rd is going to fall on a Friday. I don't think parents and kids want to come to school for one day. So as we look down the road a little bit, that's going to stretch us out. And by doing that, count out 180 days, you know what's going to happen. It's going to stretch us into June. It's just part of the trick. We'll worry about that when we get to 2019, 2020. But as you go through the calendar for 2018 and 19, it's identical. We start on Thursday. We should be done with students on Friday, May 31, and then we'll bring our staff back. Nice job, Dr. Ross. We'll bring our staff back on June 1 or on June 3 for their checkout day, and our new staff for goal setting on June 4. Again, we can go back to the end of October, and I think that you can see that we're still running Halloween the same way, only in this case we'll meet on the evenings of the 29th and 30th of October. There will be no parent-teacher conferences on the evening of the 31st. Our staff will then have parent-teacher conferences all day on November 1 and no classes on the 2nd. Very consistent, which I found the people in the community tended to enjoy over the past 25 years, but this is one that we've run by the secretaries, we've run it by the building principals and administrative team. Traditionally, I send this out on a survey monkey to the community to get feedback on that also. Between the administrative team and Dr. Ross and I, we're here to answer any questions you may have relative to this particular calendar.
The only question I have, and I don't know how this works, I think the city sets Beggars Night.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any kind of confirmation from them? Because we had to make an adjustment this year. Do we have any confirmation from them when they will be scheduling Beggars Night?
I think
They're
Kathy
pointing
was the one that made
fingers
that.
up here.
Kathy was the one that made that contact, yeah, so we were all pointing.
I think the concern was, since Halloween would be on a Wednesday, we wanted to make sure that that didn't interfere with church night. I talked with the public information officer at the city, and she said in the history of the city, she's never known it to be changed just because it's the Wednesday. So she said, with as much certainty as she could, that Beggars Night will be on Halloween.
That was a great question. I was going like this. We finally got it figured out.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
We'll bring that one back for action on, I believe it's February 8th. Thank you, Dr. Ross.
Next is time clocks.
Good evening. There we go. Well, we'll continue with the mundane subjects. But in your consent agenda, you are going to see a contract for an agreement with Frontline Education for the Veritime time clock startup. We wanted to give you a little bit of a history on, or background on why we are presenting that to you. I'm going to go over some of the requirements of what we as payroll have to do, and then I'm going to let Carl talk about the actual technology and how we selected what we did. Basically, the Fair Labor Standards Act requires employers to keep various records regarding hourly employees who are not exempt under the statute. So exempt employees would be administrators, teachers, anybody who meets a professional administrative type of role. Among the records we're required to keep are the day that the work week begins, the actual hours worked each day, the number of overtime hours worked each week, and the total number of hours worked each week. These records are required to be kept for 2 years and must be available for inspection upon by the Department of Labor. We began tracking hours for non-exempt employees in August by using paper timesheets, and we found that to be very labor intensive. As you know, as we tried to squeeze every little bit out of budgets over the years, no one works in actual, say, equal 15-minute increments. Sometimes they work to a 10-minute increment. And so trying to manually reconcile those timesheets every month has been very labor intensive. One of the things that we were looking at in a system that would help us electronically, first of all, it had to be something that would interface with Grantwood, our accounting system. That was a must, so that limited our search. But one of the main things that we do for all of our hourly employees is we pay all of our hourly employees over a 12-month basis.
So if you are scheduled to work 5 hours a day for 182 days, we take those hours times those days times your hourly pay, come up with what that annual amount is, and we divide it into 12 equal pays. So we needed a system that if we had, say, an ed associate that in a given month had days where the bus was late and they were with a child and had to stay for an extra 15 minutes, that we could plug in what their hour or weekly hours were supposed to be. Let's say it's supposed to be 26 and a half hours, that there would be a variance report that would spit out that tells us whether they worked over those contracted hours or whether they worked under them, so that we would be able to easily either add the hours to their wages of the next month or deduct hours the next month. So those were the main criteria that we had. One, interface with Grant Wood, and then the 12-month pay. So we approached Carl and asked for some help in looking at technology, and I'm going to turn it over to him.
Chris hit on some of the biggest points. Interacting with the databases that we already use on a regular basis for payroll, HR, things of that nature was of utmost importance. Also, the ease of being able to time in and time out. You can't have a line of people waiting to check in the office before they start their workday. We reached out to a large number of school districts around the state of Iowa, look at the different tools that they use for time clocks. Basically, there's two major players there for us. You have Time Clock Plus and Veritime, which is from Frontline. For those of you that have had the opportunity to sign off on checks, you may actually recognize Frontline as we use their software now for our ASOP, for our leaves, things like that. We already use them, so we already did have a business relationship with them to begin with. So we had a couple different WebExes. We looked at these different tools, talked to some different schools, what worked, what didn't. Chris and her staff even took a field trip to a school district to see how it worked. Ultimately, we did land on Frontline's tools because it met all of our criteria at a significantly cheaper cost, initial cost as well as sustained cost annually. One of the things that became so much cheaper with Frontline is we can actually repurpose some of our old Chromebooks that we used for piloting purposes. And all we need to do is buy the little Prox card reader. We can set those wherever we need them that would be convenient for timing in and timing out for our staff that need it, as opposed to Time Clock Plus, which required a special proprietary clock system, which made it much more difficult to support and pay for on the front end. The idea would be that staff can clock in with the same cards that they use for their IDs to get into the doors. So they would come into the building, they'd swipe their card, they'd check in, and they would go about their business. When they leave, they would swipe out, and then they would go home. There is some flexibility with some of these to be able to be used for certain staff. They can clock in from their desktops. It's a web-based interface. Some staff, like my IT staff, which tends to maybe start the day at different buildings, they'll be able to clock in from a mobile device so they can start clocking in right away when they get to work. Fairly straightforward, not a lot of real complexities to it. The biggest difference in your cost has to do with that hardware and the sustained support of that hardware that Time Clock charges on the front end.
One other thing that did make the Frontline software very attractive to us is because it is part of the suite with ASOP, the leave system. If an employee puts a leave in, say they put sick leave in or vacation or emergency leave in, whatever those hours are will automatically go over to the time clock and fill in for their hours for the week. Where Time Clock Plus, we would have had to have done an import. You can do an import, but we would have had to have done an import into the system. So that helped us as well. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Just for perspective, how many non-exempt employees do we have?
275?
275, roughly.
Will that number change based on whether FSLA is changed or fully implemented or rescinded or?
Well, the FLSA for hourly employees has been around since the 1940s and hasn't changed. What did change this year that's in a stay right now was the white-collar exemption rule, which increased the salary level from 24,000 up to 47,740, something like that. None of our employees that are hourly are affected by that white-collar exemption. Teachers are already exempt under the bona fide teaching professional. Administrators are exempt by their administrative duties, their level of authority within the district. So none of our hourly employees fall under that white-collar exemption anyway. So unless something would happen at the national level that would completely wipe out a law that's been in place for 75 years, I don't see anything changing.
So you're looking at it as changes for our efficiencies, not just because of the FSLA changes of the last year?
No, because the employees that were not exempt under the Act were not exempt before. We just weren't doing the record keeping.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. All right, moving on to consent, I'll take a motion.
Move to approve the consent items as presented.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Rosser. Discussion.
Got minutes of the regular meeting from December 19th, financial reports for December 2016, along with claims and payroll. There is a personnel report, or two of them actually. I'd like to point out that there are 3 voluntary early retirements. Shelley Larson has submitted her voluntary early retirement request as a homeschool coordinated teacher, which she's been doing for the last 15 years. Twyla Anderson is a second grade teacher at Fellow School after 16 years, and he sat in the back tonight, and I was hoping he would stay around a little bit longer, but Craig Boylan was also submitted his retirement for as an industrial technology teacher after 23 years of service to Ames High kids. The personnel report also has the appointment of Dr. Jones as the interim principal at Fellow School. There is a very large list of gifts that include $60 from J.C. Penney's cyber grants to the district, cash in the amount of $320 from Gurjeet Bawija to Fellows, $320 of cash from Angela Burt to Fellows. Barton Law PC has actually donated $800 for the district, part of that for student winter clothing needs, and another part for student winter clothing needs earmarked for Mitchell School. DonorsChoose.org, cash in the amount of $469.99 to the Edwards Makerspace, along with $5,000 from Lowe's Toolbox for Education for the Edwards Makerspace. Cash in the amount of $588 from 3M DonorsChoose.org for the Meeker Makerspace, $100 from Julie Yeager to Fellows, coats, gloves, hats, and blankets from the ISU Human Resource Office to the middle school, composition notebooks, dry erase markers, rubber bands from Mary Greeley Medical Center to Sawyer School, Don Joy knee braces from Mike and Terry Ollinger to high school athletic department, gloves, hats, and mittens from Quarterstone Church to Northwood, 120 bags of food, snow pants, boots, and coats from Paul Madsen to the district, 150 boxes of canned food from Collegiate United Methodist Church to the middle school, 2 cases of legal paper from Hawk to Northwood, earbuds, alarm clocks, athletic shorts, planners, and Cyride tickets from Cook Family Dentistry to Ames Middle School, 19 native plant seeds from John Judson of Diversity Farms to the high school biology native plant pollinator project, and cash in the amount of $500 from Manuka Pinawahi to the district homeless program, and $500 also an anonymous donation to Fellow School to help pay off some of the lunch balances. It's quite a list of donors, and we certainly appreciate those. We will certainly be sending them letters of our appreciation for their generosity. We have several contracts and agreements under item 14, including one for a student teacher placement from Northwestern College, an agreement with the Iowa State Center for the use of the Sheeman Building for the high school prom, which is going to be held incidentally on April 8th of 2017. We have agreement with the Frontline Education, which you just heard about, for the Veritime Clock startup from Chris and Carl. Memorandum of Understanding with United Way for the Ames Reads and Rating Readers Program. There's also, and this is not a misprint, Memorandum of Understanding with United Ways of Iowa for the Foster Grandparent Program. Memorandum of Understanding with Volunteer Center of Story County, an agreement with Camp Marketing for Super Summer online registration, and finally, sales agreement with the DeMoline Brothers and Company for the new band uniforms. There is one more item for continuous open enrollment applications. It's quite a list of consent items.
Any other discussion?
Tim, I just have one question. So on the band uniforms, how successful has the fundraising been for that? Are we cash flowing some of that, or what's the district contribution versus the fundraising?
Chris happened to meet with AEF, but I can answer that very quickly. But Chris, you may want to come up. They have actually raised the money for the entire purchase order for those particular band uniforms. And my understanding is they may have gone over it a little bit too.
Awesome.
They've done great.
Awesome.
We looked at their website last Friday, and on their website, they say they've raised $163,000. The band uniforms, the purchase orders for about $143,000.
Awesome.
All right, proceed to vote. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 16.
I move the board approve the agreement with Hale Architecture, Structure, and Planning Limited for Phase 1 services in the amount of $294,500 as it relates to the future Ames High School building project.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Franson. Discussion.
And we have Sam Stagg here that may be able to help with any questions that the board may have. I did present Sam a copy of your letter to the board in their little bit of packets that kind of gave an update that you provided to me last week of all the work that's been going on while you were on consent to proceed, so to speak, at this point. And we want to thank you for that. But questions from the board?
How's it going so far?
Really well. Try it again.
It's easy for you to say.
I think it's going really well. We've had an opportunity to meet on site a couple of different times, one with Jerry, and we took a building tour and consumed most of the day just getting kind of downloading Jerry's brain for the design team and construction management team. And then we also have had an opportunity to meet with Spence Evans, Carl Hare, Dr. Taylor, Dr. Ross, as well as Jerry, and then with half the design team oriented around programming. So we kind of have task 1 and task 2 going on concurrently. And considering the time frame, we were going to have to schedule it that way. So we've been making good progress in both of those tasks. We have started the conditions report, which will be basically a report of the existing conditions on the high school, and we're proposing to share that with the facilities committee on the 22nd of February, and continue with the programming effort, the high-level programming effort with the design team ongoing. We actually have a meeting scheduled with Spence Evans and his, you would call them maybe department leaders on Wednesday morning to continue that high-level programming conversation with Spence and his team. So things are moving right along very well. We've also been in contact with FRK, who has been doing a lot of work on the pool up to this point. So we'll be teaming with their architects and the information that they've provided so far, and folding that into some of the master planning work for the high school. I did want to ask you a quick question, if you don't mind. The schedule that we've put together has been oriented to, let me see here, there we go. Has been designed to put either a deliverable or a report in front of this board at the various meeting times scheduled so far. And so we have either a report or a deliverable that we want to present in February 27th, March 27th, April 10th, and then May 8th. And of course, we understand that we'll be offering a version of that report, either verbally or written, to the Facilities Committee in preparation for the board meetings. And so the schedules you currently have right now kind of indicates when we're targeting some of those deliverables and reports. And so if all that looks okay, we'll proceed on this particular course of action. And then also just wanted to offer up any additional questions or comments you have with either the agreement or the schedule or the status.
I know, I was asking about, and I didn't notice it until it sort of illuminated here. So in your initial pass, you guys were going to do a lot of the programming, things like that. I see now that Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill is brought into that, so there's somewhat of an offset for you guys, and you, at least in terms of your time, effort, and energy. So you obviously thought that was a good call to make at this point.
Yes, the value that we see that particular team member bringing to the table is their expertise on large projects, such as this one that we're working on for the high school, in terms of programming particularly. And so while the HALA team will be organizing the entire effort and overseeing everything, we see that team member, Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill team member particularly, providing most of their effort on that programming side of things. Once again, their experience with large-scale projects, kind of an international experience regarding education, and just some of the additional insight they offer as a larger set of experiences that can help influence and guide this project the direction we think it should go. And of course, we will vet that direction with with this team and with this board.
Any other questions? All right, proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 17.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Move the board approve change order number 4 to the contract with TK Concrete for the Mitchell project in the amount of deducts $2,490.30.
Second.
Moved by Esposito, second by Briggs. Discussion.
When I looked through this, I thought, man, this is all Seedorf stuff. This is not TK Concrete stuff, but this is back charged to TK Concrete for additional costs for Seedorf.
Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 18.
I move the board approve the open enrollment applications as presented.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, second by Rosser. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 19.
I move the board approve the plans, specifications, form of contract, and estimated total cost of the Edwards Elementary Play Area.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Briggs. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 20.
Move the board approve the notice of public hearing, February 27, 2017, plans, specifications, form of contract, and estimate total cost of the Ames Middle School auditorium lighting project.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Rosser. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 21.
Move the board approve the notice of public hearing, February 27, 2017, plans, specifications, form of contract, and estimated total cost of the Sawyer Elementary fascia and soffit project.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Franson. Discussion. So Jerry, this will match pretty well then with what's up there now?
Yes, that's the intent. They were going to match the colors exactly.
Exactly.
Yes, that's correct.
Now turn your microphone on and see if it goes through.
I feel like I'm back in the multi-purpose room.
Great. Any other discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 22.
I move the board approve change order number 10 to the contract with HPC LLC for the Fellows Project in the amount of $16,703.
Second.
Moved by Esposito, second by Rosser. Discussion.
I asked Dr. Taylor and Jerry a couple of questions about this regarding the topsoil and sod and so on and so forth, and I'm satisfied that it's right and justified and ready to go.
All right, proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 23.
I move the board approve the resolution accepting the work on the general construction, landscaping, and wood floors bid package number 10 on the Mitchell Elementary School project completed by Edge Commercial.
Second.
Moved by Briggs, second by Esposito. Discussion.
Steve, is this the last one for Mitchell? There isn't, okay, and I was keeping tally, and I thought this was the last one. There's one left.
There's next item on the agenda.
No wonder I got them all taken care of. All right.
But I think
I'm only one step ahead. Thank you.
Moved and seconded. Anything else? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 24.
I move the board approve the resolution accepting the work on the site concrete bid package number 2 and the foundations and slab on grade concrete bid package number 3 on the Mitchell Elementary School project completed by TK Concrete Incorporated.
Second.
Moved by Franson, second by Briggs. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Item 26.
I move the board approve final acceptance of the work in the masonry construction contract completed by Jeff McTaggart Masonry LLC and the Fellows Elementary School project.
Second.
Moved by Esposito, second by Briggs. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. And 27.
Move the board approve the resolution accepting the work on the mechanical construction package on the Fellows Elementary project completed by Brockway Mechanical and Roofing Company.
Second.
Moved by Esposito, second by Franson. Discussion. Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. Items from the board. I did want to update the community. We've had one thing come up regarding the Real Estate Liquidation Committee. People note we started receiving bids or proposals back in November for various properties that we're still trying to liquidate. The old Edwards building was on that list, and we received no offers to repurpose that building. However, we did receive a request from the neighborhood around that building that they'd like to turn into a park. So what they did is they came up with a good proposal for us to consider, and I would like to publicly state that the board is very interested in this proposal and is encouraging them to move forward. The board has set a goal of $250,000 for the neighborhood to reach, and then we'd turn the property over to the city of Ames to be used for a park. They've been very successful so far in early fundraising. They've already raised $130,000 as of probably a month ago. And again, I'm encouraging people, if they want to contribute to that cause. We're going to be demoing the building regardless. It's really in the district's best interest and the community's best interest to get that taken care of. So Jerry's already working on proposals to get that done. It is going to cost substantially more than the $250,000, but again, we're trying to be respectful and transferring these properties in a mindful way. So just an update for the community that there is going to be some action with that, and hopefully that group can continue to raise funds. Any other questions from the board on that point? All right, anything else from the board?
We will be posting, TLC did have an opportunity to meet last week, and we will be posting those minutes. We just met on Wednesday, maybe, of last week. So, but it was a good opportunity to get an update, on the word study team and the pilot that is going on. Had an opportunity to be able to entertain some questions that we had from some individuals from the community. Talked more about the attendance goal and then this whole definition of success. I'm just going to let you all know, heads up, it's going to come back to you with maybe some more things to think about as you provide us maybe some more refined guidance on where to go from there, but more to come.
I think that, I mean, the whole point of that goal, I think, is to allow a discussion to start with the community. A lot of the points that were brought up tonight about feedback, I think, fit right into that. So it's something that we keep getting told what we should be looking at, but I think we need, as a community, to redevelop that for ourselves. So I'm encouraged.
Yeah, so I'm not one to weigh in on a lot of things like that, but I think this Iowa report card, so many of these things are just such terrible distractions from what we need to be focused on, that we need to own success and not let it be defined by stuff like that.
All right, items from staff.
Got some quick items for you. I've put together a little packet for you. We did have kindergarten registration January 26 and 27, and it was held here for the first time. Appeared to be pretty successful. So far, 262 students have enrolled for as a kindergarten class beginning in 2017. That seems kind of low, but actually people are pretty encouraged to go through that process or help us with our process. 250 was our target, which means that we will probably, between now and the start of school next year, hopefully inherit somewhere between 40 to anywhere up to 80 additional kindergarten students getting ready for next year. That was in the information that I provided to the board. I also gave you a little comparison on where we were on count day on our per building enrollments, and just at the elementary level incidentally, and where we are on January 20th. And you'll notice that on count day, our elementary total was 185. We're now at 2,011 students, which are the students who have come in to enroll in the district after count day that we will be providing educational services for. That really is up by something like 26 individual students, which is pretty good for us. We will expect probably within the next couple of weeks a few more that will be coming in, especially from, or would normally be coming in, especially from some of our Asian countries. There was a little scare this last week with Ames High relative to our flu that went through there. I want to give Austin a lot of credit for getting something out in the paper. We wanted to make sure that people understood that this wasn't an emergency, but we were just trying to do our best to make sure if we can kind of get ahead of it, which apparently we did. The odd part about this was it didn't impact our elementaries. We checked all week long relative to what our elementary absenteeism was. It was very, very low. As a matter of fact, on Thursday of last week at Edwards School, the absentee rate was 1.5%, which is amazingly low, especially for the wintertime. But we were trying to get, and Jerry and Heather came up with the idea of going in and trying to do another deep cleaning, which we normally do every couple of weeks, but trying to make sure that we're trying to get ahead of it as best we could. Obviously, I didn't make it tonight, but there was the annual Invention Convention. I imagine Carl was there, but it was at Fellow School. It's usually quite an activity. We'll have to get some feedback on that one for you. And I think Dr. Ross has got a couple things that I wanted her to come up and talk about. First of all, a little bit of an update on the last attendance meeting, Dr. Ross, and then there's another one, the Fred Duffel-Mile Reading Improvement Clinic. We wanted to make sure we get some special mention on that. We are actually very encouraged with what we're coming up with our attendance committee. And Rick Sanders from the Board of Supervisors has been more than helpful in getting Jessica Reynolds, our new Story County attorney, over here now twice, I believe, to meet with us, and in those discussions help provide us some support as we're trying to really go after our attendance issues. Dr. Ross?
As I mentioned during our earlier presentation, the attendance committee was really kind of gurgled up because we recognize that we've got groups of students who really are frequently missing a lot of school. And so, you know, it was just another way to work at improving what's going on in our classrooms and across the district. So the attendance committee does consist of representation from the state level, the community level, the county level, and then of course our board members are represented as well. We also have representation from principals at the elementary, middle, and high school, and United Way is represented. But basically what the group is doing is looking at different ways we can approach attendance issues using the same model, the multi-tiered systems of support model that we are using in our classrooms for academics and for behavior. And now we're looking at using that model and dropping it over attendance in particular. So tier one then would be the 80% of all students who really don't have a lot of problems, helping make sure that that message gets out there that school is important. And as I mentioned earlier this evening, not just school is important, but starting when that first day a student attends school, whether it's preschool or kindergarten, and then helping the families acknowledge that. So what resources do we need to do that? You know, it's getting down to the level of discussion about if I'm in Target over my noon hour and I see a school-age student, as a community member, do I have some responsibility to say something or do something? That's how finite that, or fine-tuned that conversation is getting. It's not that we have the answers, but we're looking at models from other districts and also best practices across the state and nation. As a matter of fact, our administrators are a part of a meeting on April 21st, I think it is, where somebody from Attendance Works, which is a national organization with best practices in attendance, is going to come talk to our administrators about different ways of looking at helping students become more responsible about attending school and supports we can provide families. And as I previously mentioned, Jessica Reynolds, the new Story County attorney, came in to visit with our principal representatives the other day and is coming back to visit with all of our administrators just because she's got some ideas about what she has seen be successful, including meeting with families pre-mediation, which precedes any truancy activity at the court level. So really trying to get some innovative ideas and also some motivation so that everybody understands the importance of attending school. Any questions about that? And Tim and Elisa, if there's anything that from that first meeting that you can think of? And the second item?
The Duffelmeyer Reading Improvement
Thank you.
Clinic.
Just before the board meeting this evening, I forwarded an email to the board members about a pilot that we are going to start here in a couple of weeks with the Duffelmeyer Reading Clinic. And we're very excited. Linda Lind, who also happens to be an Ames High graduate, as a matter of fact, her father was my algebra teacher at Ames High. And she and I started kind of having some informal discussions about ways that we could get the students who are working on the reading endorsement at the Duffelmeyer Reading Clinic into our schools to help tutor our students. So it really would be a win-win. And Justin Jeffs at Mitchell has agreed to be part of that pilot, and so we're going to start it at Mitchell. We're going to start off with 4 Iowa State students tutoring 4 Mitchell students, and the Mitchell staff is working right now to identify those kids who really would benefit from that one-on-one tutoring. We'll see how that goes. We'll start working out the kinks and then begin to explore for next year how to expand the tutoring from the Duffelmeyer Reading Clinic into all of our elementaries as an after-school project. So I'd be happy to entertain questions on that.
I think that's a nice collaboration with Iowa State.
It's truly a win-win for everyone. And I think the Duffelmeyer Reading Clinic has been held at Lago Marcino Hall. And if you've ever taken a class or gone to activities at Lago, parking is your greatest challenge. As a matter of fact, I'm not so sure that my graduate program wasn't financed more by my parking tickets than my actual tuition. That being said, I think the element that makes it a real winning situation for our students and our families is they don't have to drive out to campus. They don't have to look for a parking space for an hour plus of tutoring, and really getting people who are working diligently on that reading endorsement to work one-on-one with our kids is a great opportunity. And one of the things that we're doing is, especially at in the pilot phase, and I can't speak to beyond that at the moment, but for the pilot phase, the Duffelmeyer Reading Clinic is waiving their $150 fee in order to be able to use our building. So again, I think it's a win-win all the way around.
Very quickly, a couple last items in your, presented to the board tonight in their packet. A legal opinion from Ron Peeler with Allers Law and Cooney, which is our school attorney. I think at this time it's kind of confidential, but it gets back into pool financing options. There's a couple options that he talked about, which we'll have to bring back in front of the facilities committee and have some venting going on there, but I wanted to share that with you at this current time. Kind of a sad note, Daniel Andriotti was a high school senior who graduated at Ames High just this last spring in 2016, who tragically passed away over the weekend, and we'll get some more information on that one. We hate to lose our great grad students or graduates that way, that young. And finally, I think a couple things. We certainly would like the public to get excited with their legislators too. One thing you have to keep in mind is the numbers that I've heard right now coming out of our state legislature as far as an increase in state aid is anything from 2%, which is what the governor said, to 1.1%. If you want to reflect on that for a second, that almost covers our fixed cost increases for next year. It doesn't do anything in covering our costs for increases in health insurance and salary increases. On a normal year, I'm usually looking for $800,000 to $1 million to maintain programming and class sizes. And this board has worked so extremely hard over the 6 years that I've been in this particular chair to keep class sizes down and maintain that programming, because that programming is what makes Ames special. I know it does. Build it and they will come as part of the facilities thing, which was done with the GO bond and with the 1 cent sales tax. Not a bit came out of the general fund. The general fund pays for everything else. Garbage collection, books, transportation, gasoline, salaries, benefits, everything that you can imagine in an $80 million budget is really controlled by that general fund. And that general fund has to be one of those that is maintained at about 80% of that general fund and no more for personnel or for human resources. The reason for that is the fixed costs eat up about 20%, and as fixed costs go up, it pushes into that human resource factor. So anything that you can do in talking with your state legislators to try and help us. I am afraid of the future of public education in Iowa. The discussions over vouchers, private schools, charter schools, has me a little bit nervous. And the fact that it seems like we've been starved to death very slowly over a long period of time relative to our general fund increases has me very, very concerned. As I'm kind of coming to the close of my career, I'm really worried about kids like Dr. Ross's grandsons and kids that I see and I work with almost on a daily basis. I'm worried about their future and what's going to happen with public education. So if you can get out and work with your legislators, help them realize what this is doing. And again, I think we won't eventually at this rate have much alternative than increased class sizes and reduced programming to keep a public entity such as this one afloat. And that one really does hurt. It's our fine arts programs. It's all of our co-curricular activities that make us so special. And I bet very few people realize that 85 to 90% of our high school students are involved in some kind of co-curricular activity. That across the state is amazing. And that's what helps set us apart. And I know just from my athletic background, in my small hometown, if I was going to Ames, I would never have seen the basketball floor. I would never have seen the football field. It would have been one of those many, many opportunities that we're providing kids that they can connect with, not only with themselves, but with their classmates and with this district and with the school. So anything you can do with the legislators to help us realize a few more dollars certainly wouldn't hurt us in the long run. So that being said, the only last thing is congratulations, Mike. Thanks. You have represented the district quite well in Dancing with the Stars, I understand, with great class and dignity. So, and you raised some good money. Thank you very much.
Raise all money.
Yeah.
Anything else? All right, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Briggs. Discussion? Proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Passes 6-0. We're adjourned.